لم يبق هنا أحد لم يسمع ضجاتهم. أبواق تنفخ في السور، بكاء وعويل مقطوع وصهيل خيول شاردة في شارع. أجيال تهبط، أجيال تصعد في كل شروق وغروب، وشهود في حلقات يمضون إلى آلهة الموتى بقرابين الأحياء. لم يبق هنا أحد لم يسمع ضجاتهم. فاذهب واسأل هذا النائم في سفح الجبل الشاهق، ماذا تفعل؟
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this launch event for the third edition of the Gaza Kitchen. I am Helena Cobban, the founder and CEO of Just World Books, and I greet you from the traditional lands of the Nakoch tanks and the Piscataways. This is a wonderful moment for me and for our two talented authors, Maggie Schmitt and Laila El-Haddad, who will be joining us on the program here very, very soon. What a journey this has been. The subtitle of this book has always been A Palestinian Culinary Journey. For Laila and Maggie, that journey started when they first had the idea of compiling a cookbook of Gaza's many very distinctive recipes. It became a real physical journey for them in the summer of 2010 when they traveled tirelessly up and down the Gaza Strip, collecting the recipes and taking the photos that later formed the core of this totally engaging cookbook. Just World Books brought out the first edition in 2012. And since then, here is the first edition. Since then, we have all been on a journey that has helped Maggie and Laila take their beautiful work to many different places. Along the way, they helped put Palestinian food on the map of the world's great cuisines. And they put their super engaging photos of Gaza Palestinian home cooks, families, and food sector workers into the hands of food lovers everywhere. Today, Palestinians and rights activists around the world are still reeling from Israel's latest assault on the people of Gaza and Jerusalem. I'd like to invite you all to join me in a few moments of silent remembrance of all those lives lost, those homes destroyed. I am delighted, though, that at such a crucial time, we do now, after a long COVID-forced delay, have the updated third edition of the book ready for readers in North America. And the recipes and much of the other content from the book are also available worldwide today from the website cookbook.com, that is spelled ckbk.com. And just before we bring in Maggie and Laila, I want to remind you that for every copy of the book that's purchased this month, Just World Books will donate $2 to Chef Jose Andres' World Central Kitchen, which recently took their agile emergency feeding program to Gaza, just as they also have teams working right now in Juarez, Mexico, and in several cities in India. So please stock up on copies of the book this month, so you can help boost what we give to World Central Kitchen. Also, my colleague Amel Zaroug is behind the scenes here on the webinar. If you have any tech inquiries, please send them to her in the chat box. And toward the end of today's program, we'll hope to take questions from attendees. So please put your substantive questions or comments in the chat box too, so we can wrangle them there. So now, Laila and Maggie, it is great to have you both with us. Laila is with us from Maryland and Maggie from Spain. So take it one at a time, each of you. Can you each share one of your favorite vignettes from the big research trip you made to Gaza in 2010 for the book?
I think, Maggie, you're still muted, but first of all, I'd like to say welcome. I don't know, I wish I could see who was on. Is there a way to see? It's always kind of weird talking to a screen. Never gotten used to this, but welcome whoever's watching. It's so exciting that we've, all gotten to this point and finally seen, the updated edition come to fruition. It's been quite a journey, and we always, I think we were always hesitant, Maggie and I, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, about what we were doing and like whether it made sense. And so we're really pleased to continuously get feedback about that validates our initial intuitions about what an important approach and work this was, we'd like to think. But in terms of, one of my favorite moments, encounters, experiences, really there's so many. I think just being able to initially enter Gaza at that time in the summer of 2010, I had two young children, 5 and 2.5. It wasn't certain Maggie would be able to get in. Miraculously, she did. We met for the first time, and one of our first really encounters was at a clinic in Gaza City where we were told, I think we were waiting for my mother. I don't know what brought us there, Maggie. Initially, I can't remember, but all I remember is we were conversing amongst ourselves. I think we were told there may be a woman, a nurse or something that knew a thing or two, or may be able to point us in the right direction. Like where should we begin? Who should we talk to about this crazy project? Would they take us seriously? Would they understand what it was about? Very much at a time and place when really like the idea of writing about Palestinian food was certainly not on the forefront of people's minds. It wasn't a thing. It was considered maybe something really like frivolous and, almost ridiculous, like insulting in a way, like why would you write about this at a time when with everything that Gaza is enduring? This was really at the height, the worst year of the blockade on Gaza. And as we were having this conversation amongst ourselves, sort of, anticipating the response, suddenly we heard a man pop his head out of one of the rooms. And I guess he must have heard us mention like a dish, some recipe that we wanted to obtain or that we had heard about called fool or was bamia wa adas, yes, Maggie? And okra and lentils, like a very sort of rustic dish, very seasonal from very particular villages. And till this day, if you mention this to anyone, even from Gaza, they're likely to like raise an eyebrow and go, what? Okra and lentils? And as we were discussing it, this man pops his head out and said, did you say okra and lentils? That's my favorite dish, but it's actually made with fava beans, not lentils. Let me tell you all about it and about my village and the history of the surrounding villages and the history of Jabalia, under Ottoman rule and Ottoman land laws. And he went on and on and on. And we were like, whoa. And then all these other people came and surrounded us. And like the enthusiasm was just like infectious. And really, that was sort of the beginning. It was like, there wasn't even an acceleration. Just suddenly we were thrust into the throes of this. And it was like this, one person after another for the next 2 months. And then we realized like then and there, okay, we're clearly not gonna have a problem like, conversing to people, they get it. There's no shortage of recipes. There's only a shortage of pages. And we knew we were onto something and that we were greeted, so warmly and enthusiastically that everybody knew that this was, we were on the right track,
It's funny, Helena mentioned that she was going to ask us about favorite vignettes, and then Laila and I didn't talk in advance about which vignettes we wanted to share, but I was thinking of exactly that same moment as the sort of moment of going in kind of nervously, like, how do we broach this question, and getting a total, like, it was our first day in Gaza together. We had never met each other before. Like, all of this came about in the most sort of serendipitous and improbable way. Our encounter with each other, the decision to, like, you know, it's kind of now or never, we have this opportunity to get into Gaza, let's try it. And then being there, like, we didn't know each other, we weren't really quite sure what we were doing, we had this idea, we were really convinced it was a great idea, but and that moment in the Red Crescent office was that, like, total reaffirmation of, like, yes, indeed, like, you can use recipes as a way to tell social history, talk about politics and economics from a totally different position, um, talk about family histories, about legacies, about memory, about all of the stuff that we were convinced you could tell through food, but we thought people might think we were, daft proposing it. And that one moment at the Red Crescent, we were there like by accident. We were there to pick up Layla's kids or something, or get a key to the house, or I don't know, something completely banal and unrelated to the actual research. And suddenly, like, every door in the office opened and everybody converged upon us wanting to, fight about whether this or that dish had onions or garlic, and we were like, all right, we're gonna be okay. This is gonna be fine. And from there, it was, one auntie that led us to the next, and really there was, we were so it's a lot to ask people, no, to, like, can I come into your house, spend the whole day with you, cook your foods, interview you, talk to you, mine you for your family knowledge and your personal history. It's a big ask, and we were a little bit timid about, how do we go about getting people to give us all this information. And suddenly it was like the floodgates opened up, and we were rolling.
Not to mention, it was Ramadan and there were constant electricity cuts. I mean, there's a couple of beautiful photos in the book. There's one of Maggie holding the light up above the person making the cherry jam or whatever it was.
That was definitely an anecdote. We had spent all day looking for those cherries. They're kind of trees.
With the plums, right? The sour
yeah, the Arasia. Yeah. A kind of like small sour plums that are traditional locally, but there are very few of those trees left because of the sort of systematic raising of orchards and fruit growing areas along the border zone. So there are very few, and the unavailability of water and all of these other issues. So there are very few Aracia trees still producing, and we had alerted everyone we could. If you see Aracia for sale, we need them. And finally we got them, and finally we were making this Aracia jam, and then boom, the lights went out, and we were like, how do we take pictures in darkness? So yeah, that was
so anyway, Maggie, this is a good follow-up for you as someone who is not originally from Gaza, unlike Laila, who has like generations of Gaza food knowledge. Maggie, for you, what have you found to be the most distinctive thing about Gaza cuisine?
I mean, the most distinctive, there's what we always say. What characterizes Gaza cuisine? Well, it's the sort of peculiar mixture of herbs, lots of sour tastes, whether from sour plums, like we mentioned, the aracia, or sumac, or lemon, or sour wild greens like sorrel. Anyway, the fondness for sourness, a fondness for spiciness, and for lots of green herbs, especially dill, which is unusual in the whole region. So that's kind of what we always cite as the peculiarities of Gazan cuisine, sort of in contrast with the other, the kind of continuum of Levantine cuisine that surrounds it, and that obviously it forms part of. But I think for me, talking to people about the experience, and it's been reaffirming for me, talking to like users of the cookbook and people that have read it and used it, that I think we managed to transmit it in the book because people have sort of reflected it back to me, like the pleasure of immersing yourself in a whole new grammar of cooking. Like there are a lot of the hows, and one of the sections of the book we talk about like a lot of the part of what's so fantastic about this cuisine is the like clarity and precision of each taste. They really, really, really value the sort of like ding, clear as a bell. Like you can taste each thing. There's nothing smudgy about it. And part of that comes from like the way you clean the ingredients before cooking them, the way you clean the pots and pans. I mean, even the apparatus, and then the grammar of cooking, like how you I don't know, to give one example, like the way I learned to cook, the sort of, fridge derived Western traditions of cooking, you brown something and then you braise it in liquid. And the the general sort of Middle Eastern approach is first you cook it in liquid and then you brown it afterwards. And these are minor things, but they have a huge impact on texture, on taste, on how flavor is transmitted. Um, and for me, it was just a pleasure to be sort of immersed in this other grammar and try to understand it and try to figure out how it works. And it was a big sort of learning voyage that has influenced very much how I cook, whether I'm cooking Gazan food or not. Like it's a whole way of doing that changes.
Oh my goodness, there's somebody wants to say something. Amel.
Hello, my name's Raj Patel, and I'm here in the occupied territories of the Comanche and Tonkawa people in Austin, Texas. Now, when I first saw the first edition of the Gaza Kitchen 10 years ago, I was blown away by the breadth of sociology, of history, and of gastronomic good taste that was inside. Now, this third edition builds on that foundation and reminds us that despite an ongoing and brutal occupation, a deep dignity and humanity survives in Gaza, a humanity that can and does share one of the world's greatest cuisines, despite living under one of its worst food systems. If you're keen to connect and understand this part of the world better, I can't think of a better place to start than the Gaza Kitchen.
Congratulations, Laila and Maggie, on your third edition release of the Gaza Kitchen. I'm just so happy that we have a book like the Gaza Kitchen out there. It was instrumental to my development, not only as a chef, but as a Palestinian in diaspora, really understanding the foods of my people. And it just means so much for you all to have put our food essentially on the map here in the American mainstream. Congratulations again, and can't wait to see the new edition.
Well, it's so lovely to hear from your friends. I mean, the amount of enthusiasm that everybody has for your book. So, okay, Laila, you're up now. What food from the book have you brought with you today?
Yes. Well, I did want to say, I know you mentioned generations of Gazan food knowledge, but this is the thing, and I think this is critical to the conversation. That a lot of that was lost, right? And I think was lost not only to me as a Palestinian who grew up in diaspora, even though I was visiting Gaza regularly, right? I was largely in the Gulf and estranged, and that applies to, millions of Palestinians, most of whom have not had a chance to physically visit their homeland. And even when they do, right, they're fragmented and forcibly separated from other parts of Palestine and from family oftentimes, and from that knowledge, right? From that culinary knowledge. And that's part of why we wrote the Gaza Kitchen. And we've mentioned this multiple times, but most of the residents of Gaza are not from there, right? They're from other towns and villages that have been completely erased and demolished. So going into this, I didn't know, I knew there was a lot of really interesting dishes unique to Gaza that other Palestinians weren't making where I grew up. But I didn't know maybe more than half of what I discovered, And I think this applies equally to even Palestinians who currently live in Gaza. They'll like I mentioned before, they'll raise an eyebrow and say okra and lentils, or it's very regionally specific. So I certainly didn't know everything. I didn't inherit all of this. I I'm always still really excited when something like works. I know people find this surprising. They're like, oh, you're a chef. I'm like, no, I'm not. I wasn't trained as a chef. I love food, and I love the way that food brings people together and tells a different story, but I'm certainly not, I'm always a little bit of a food geek. And like I always say, I still get excited when a maqluba flips perfectly. I'm not like one of those ones who just effortlessly puts together a table and it all comes together seamlessly. So this is a journey of discovery for me as much as I think as it was for everyone else. So I'll just put that out there. But that being said, what I'm making, I figured nothing too complicated. I wanted to make a sort of classic, right? I'm just going to move this back a little bit, excuse me. One that obviously most people are probably familiar with, but that nevertheless, I thought just perfectly encapsulates and summarizes, what Gaza is about. And when we think of Gaza, the most iconic salad is dagga, also known as salata Gazawiya, right? Which is this hot chili and tomato and dill mashed salad, for lack of a better term. We always like to refer to it as a salsa-like consistency, because when you say salads, people think of kind of like leafy, but it is called salata Gazawiya, Gazan salad, and it has a lot of variations, but it's most often, synonymous with Gazan cuisine, classic, I would say, Gazan cuisine, not sort of the rural cuisine or the cuisine of the fallahin or anything like that. And my grandmother, who herself wasn't Palestinian, but was born and raised in Palestine, used to call it the centerpiece of the Gazan table, sufra al-Gazawiya, right? And so it's always made with a zibdiya. And for those who are joining us who are not familiar, I apologize if I'm repeating myself like 1,000 times. It's an unglazed clay mortar and a lemon wood pestle, traditionally. Now, in the modern day, and this also speaks to sort of the dire conditions under which most Palestinians in Gaza live, this itself is cheap, right? It's just made from the sort of earth and clay and fired in Gaza in a tradition that dates back, thousands of years. But getting the lemon wood pestle, most people, when I went back there recently, wouldn't be able to get the real deal. They would just get the plastic. It's not become as affordable, and it has a sort of a rough interior. It's not glazed. I always tell people, if you don't have this is what it's always served in and what you'll see in every Gazan household, right? As Maggie and I learned, I mean, I knew this, of course, as Maggie learned, but we did learn that people prize, some of them keep these zibdiyas for like generations. We met someone who I'll talk about in a little bit, who has since passed, Allah yarhamu, from COVID, but who had one that was 30 years old that he considered a member of his family, right? They get nice and seasoned. So Palestinians of Gaza are very passionate, but go a little bit further, go to anywhere else in Palestine, they will have no idea what this is, right? They won't use it. So interesting, it is kind of ubiquitous and central to the cuisine. I always tell people, like, don't panic. Really, any mortar and pestle, except for the little tiny ones or the ones that are really smooth, will do. I have a nice granite one that works. And then I'm like, in a pinch, just grab a rock from your garden or from the yard. Honestly, this does work. I've done it before. Use any board and you can mash it on it works just fine. I mean, just if you're careful. I just don't like using the food processor. So without further ado, and really worst comes to worst, use just a knife and just mash. But I just like the texture of it, right? I don't like so I'm just gonna, this is very quick. I don't want to take up too much time because we want to keep conversing and we're happy to do so. All you do is you take a pinch of salt and that just helps the garlic that you're going to mash. It gives it a little bit more friction. And this is a point of contention. If anyone is watching and is from Gaza, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of feedback. I grew up with it with garlic, but maybe half of the other Palestinians grew up with saying, no, it must be made with onion, like a small little onion or green onion or something, never with garlic. It's again, one of these things that people feel are really passionate about. Like, it is absolutely not that good to make it with garlic, and others say, no, it is. So garlic, but before that, I'm gonna say it's ordinarily made with fresh dill greens, right? This is I just picked it from my garden. So everything here is seasonal, which is great. However, growing up when I was in Saudi Arabia, it was really hard to find dill greens. And so we would use dill seeds, right? And they do also use this in Gaza out of season, but we most often used it in diaspora because dill greens were hard to find. I like to now in my present day kitchen mix a little bit of both. I find they both add unique flavors. You can find dill seeds online in Turkish markets and Persian markets. So I'm just gonna start before the garlic with the dill seeds and the salt, and then just, you kind of, in a circular motion, you're gonna coarsely, you can smell that already, you can coarsely just grind. You don't want them to be like a powder. And I always give this anecdote of my grandmother, Allah yarhamha, who hated cooking and would always task me with like the laborious jobs like this. And she would say to me, like, I would go like this. I was really like teeny tiny, skinny kid. And she would, anemic, and she would be like, don't grind like a wimp. She's like, put some muscle into it. You have to hold it down and really go like this. So I always think of her when I smell those beautiful, the dill oil, you know, very strong. So that's it. And then you just add your garlic or onion and just give it a quick firm mash. You don't want big chunks of garlic. Right? And that's going to be followed by the hot peppers. I have some jalapenos here. You can use serrano peppers. In Gaza, they have their own unique variety of like searingly hot pepper. I once made the mistake of like chopping and then going and making wudu before prayer, like ablution. Don't ever do that. My eyes were on fire for about an hour. So I have some that I have pre-chopped here. I'm just gonna use them because I don't wanna waste them. So usually I would recommend removing some of these white like piths if you don't want, you know, little bitter chunks of pepper. But again, this is super simple. Just give it a rough chop because you're ultimately gonna use your mortar and pestle as the, you know, your food processor kind of thing. And then just mash those peppers quickly. My dad used to always say, dagga should be more green than it is red, meaning like you really wanna go heavy on those chili peppers. Don't be afraid of the heat. And you know, even though, again, ask any Palestinian what they know of Gaza cuisine, and they will frequently say they like it hot, right? Like the shatta and the peppers. But you know, we discovered that's not universally true, and a significant part of the population who are not traditionally from Gaza don't like their food hot and don't like garlic, right? So they'll often say, oh, that's something they make in the city, but you know, we are from, you know, insert village here, we don't make it that way, right? So for example, where I'm adding dill, if you go a bit further north, and I'm just adding 2, you know, roughly chopped, really ripe tomatoes. This works really well for those like, you know, peak of summer tomatoes that are just oozing with juice or whatever. Don't discard them. This is what they're made for. But if you go just a few miles or kilometers north of Gaza City, and you'll end up in some of the other villages there, Beit Jirja, Hamama, etc. They will maybe omit the dill and add parsley and a little tahina or cucumbers in Beit Jirja, and then suddenly it's called salatat Beit Jirja or, you know, something else. So there's a lot of little variations of this. Remove the garlic, add onion. Remove the dill, add parsley. You know, add lemon juice and tahina and mix it all together. So I'm just showing you kind of the classic one, and I don't want to take up too much time. I feel like I could talk about this one salad for like an hour, you know? So I'm pretty much almost done here. So just gonna mash the tomatoes. And again, this should be effortless. If the tomatoes are really ripe, you're not gonna need to do a whole lot. I can show everyone what it looks like so far, but I'm just kind of mashing all that goodness together. And like Maggie said, you can really taste and smell each of those elements, like the garlic and the dill seeds. I haven't yet added the dill greens and the tomato. And it's just, I always say this, but it's true. It's like an explosion of flavors in your mouth. And I'm just like managing to get like tomatoes and chili everywhere now. My whole kitchen is eating with me. So I'm a very messy cook, I should say. My mom always says I need a whole staff of people when I'm cooking because I just can't be bothered. Okay, so I like to just chop and then like mix in the dill. I find that if you actually try to like mash it, it gets kind of bitter. I don't know why, if you've had that experience or not, Maggie. But so just adding a little bit. I'm not adding too much just because I didn't have that much. It's kind of towards the end of its season here. So, but you should be adding a little bit more than what I just added. And then I'm just gonna grab a spoon and stir everything together. And then add a little bit of a drizzle of lemon juice. Again, if my mother was here, she would just be horrified and say, you don't add lemon juice, but it really just depends what part of Gaza you're in. They'll, make things a little bit differently. So just finish it off with a little squeeze of lemon juice. And like I said, you can add a little bit of tahina at this point, sesame seed paste, and it will transform into Salatat Abu Safiya, who, we talked about, was this incredible man, incredibly generous with both his knowledge and his time. And he invited us to his house and told us all about his zadiyah and the various salads that he was like super enthusiastic about making, and showed us a couple of them. And we have a recipe named after him called Salatat Abu Safiya. And he was from Hamama, the village of Hamama. And sadly, his daughter informed me a few months ago, she was in New Zealand, I believe, and that he had passed away from COVID, and how, touched she was by the fact that she hadn't been able to see him in 10 years because of the blockade and restrictions on travel for Palestinians, which is very typical, of course, and incredibly sad. But she felt like she was so happy that his recipes, his knowledge was preserved in the book. And that really touched me, I think, a lot. So like I said, you add a little bit of tahina and it transforms into a salad that that we had named after him. So I'm just adding this great Canaan fair trade Palestinian olive oil on top. And you want to a really generous, drench it with olive oil, right? Don't be afraid. And then that's it. And that's Denga for you. I don't know if you had anything to add, Maggie. I wish I could share it with you all.
Yum, yum, yum.
I'll take a quick picture before we continue. Let's see if I can or not, but all right.
Fantastic. Oh, wow. I wish I could be there, but guess what? There's some other people who want to be here too.
Hi, I'm Sami Tamimi. I'm a chef and author from London, UK. The Gaza Kitchen cookbook was far ahead of its time, and I believe it was a book that allowed other Palestinian cookbook to be published. It also allowed the world to see inside of Gaza.
Hi guys, Reem Kassis here, author of The Palestinian Table and The Arabesque Table. And I just wanted to give a shout out to my good friend Laila El-Haddad's book, The Gaza Kitchen, whose 3rd edition is coming out now. It's actually the first Palestinian cookbook I remember hearing about, and I know her work has paved the way for many of us who have come out after her. So please do support it, do buy it. It's a wonderful book with so many very unique recipes, and it'll make your kitchen smell wonderful and your table be full with delicious food.
Thank you, Sami and Reem. Wow. And thank you, Laila, for that amazing food demo.
Yeah, I'm sitting there eating. I mean, you guys could join me. I don't think anyone else in my family will eat. This is the tragedy, right? Like, my husband's from the north of Palestine, so
Anyway.
So Maggie, please come and join me.
So Maggie, you have talked about how the view from the kitchen gives someone a distinctive perspective on the world. Can you or Laila elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the strategy of the book, and I mean the book, when we proposed doing it, it was for a number of different reasons. Like, on the one hand, nobody had documented the food traditions, as we mentioned before, and so there was a real interest in the food itself, but then also looking around at how Palestinian stories get told, especially in the United States, especially at that time. Like, I think now that things are shifting a lot about what stories get told and how, but at that moment, the sense was of a real impasse. And like, how can we talk about the history, the economy, the blockade, what's going on there in a really different way that gives people access to, lived daily life, and how people there are actually experiencing their reality, and start just jump over some of the impasses and some of the cliches about Palestine, about the Palestinian people. So the strategy was to try to tell the story sort of from the kitchen view. Like how do you look out the kitchen window and understand the world? So we're talking about the food, but we're not only talking about the food. The food is always taking place in a context, and that context is obviously political, it's economic, it's ecological, it's social. There's a lot going on, and I think it's really privileged. The kitchen provides this sort of privileged point of departure for looking at things, because each ingredient has to come from somewhere. Each ingredient brings with it its whole story, and we can kind of start with the recipe and then like pull on those threads and climb out from there, in order to trace the whole really like labyrinthine food system, how each ingredient gets there, and what kind of access people have to it. And it's a way of talking about the domestic economy of each individual household, the family history of each household, because as each and every one of us, no matter where you're from, knows, like the food you cook always comes with some story. It always comes laden with recollections of, a favorite neighbor or an aunt or somebody. Like food brings with it stories. And so it's the family histories, sort of sociological stuff about who did you learn to cook from, and how was that transmitted, and understanding, who cooks, who takes responsibility for food stuff within a household, and then what it tells us also about the stories, the ingredients bring with us. So I think the effort was through the book was to try to do, at least to some extent, all of those things. And what we found was that it really does work to tell a very different story. That, I mean, the anecdote or the observation we always share is that if you go and you say, I want to talk about the borders, or I want to talk about the political economy here, I want to talk about, you'll always get referred to usually a sort of relatively high-ranking male person who will give you, whatever that moment's kind of official position is, the politically strategic or salient way of describing what's happening at that moment. And I think most journalists enter into Gaza at that moment. We were seeing, journalists sort of being airlifted in, coming in, doing 4 interviews with, whatever authoritative figure they were being referred to, and then leaving. And, those are valid stories, but it's a very different story if you go in asking for lentil recipes, instead of being referred to that sort of authority figure male, you get shuffled into the kitchen, and that's where this whole other conversation is going on. And that's where, as we all know, like the real conversations are always happening in the kitchen. The real figuring out of, like, how do you make ends meet? How do you put food on the table in these economic circumstances? Where is that food coming from? How do you get it? And tracing that stuff. So for us, the kitchen was really a privileged entree into understanding the food, but also so much more that goes beyond food, or the stories that the food brings with it.
Laila, anything to add? You actually just, when you were doing the cooking demo,
Yeah.
you told us so many stories. You demonstrated it. It was like that was fun.
I was gonna say, if I cook something, I if you ask me directly, I'll just struggle to think. But I think that was the idea, right? When we went into people's homes and we sat with them, I think their initial, their instinct was to try to serve us, the fanciest and most like celebratory dishes. But when we would say, no, show us how to make this like really simple, or something you would have on a weeknight, they were kind of scratching their heads, like, really? Like, this is embarrassing. This is what you want me to show you? And
people are so hospitable that they wanted to do the like lavish banquet foods, right, every time they have a guest, but we would have to insist, no, like really, we want the sort of humble weeknight food.
And I think that's maybe where also the book differs from a lot of other books on Palestinian cuisine, is we really did want to capture those, everyday, seasonal, regional specific dishes, not the kebabs and the manasif and the whatnot. I mean, certainly we talk about those dishes and we cover them, but we were more interested in this other aspect of, Palestinian food. And some of them you might think, well, is this worthy to be like in a cookbook kind of thing? Or people wonder, like, why is batal bid in there? Or why even there's a dish that was more of sort of for historical reference, a couple of dishes that emerged during the years of the Nakba when Palestinians, were displaced and on the run kind of thing and unstable. And, there was a few years where they only had access to certain things that were being delivered from various aid organizations. And there's a whole genre of dishes that emerged from that era, from that decade, right? So we do include things like that. And that's why we like to say it's sort of a documentary and a storytelling cookbook,
That's great. Before I come to the next question, I just want to give everybody who's on the webinar, all our wonderful attendees, 3 quick reminders. First of all, we'd love it, of course, if when you get your copy of the book, you could take a photo of yourself or a friend poring over it or displaying it, cooking from it, and post some pictures onto Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Please be sure to tag us at Just World Books, at the Gaza Kitchen, and at Gaza Mom. And I think Laila is Gaza Mom, and Maggie is sort of social media averse, which is fine. So this Friday, Laila will be doing an Instagram live event at 3 p.m. Eastern with our friends from Olive and Heart, where she'll be announcing the winners of 2 giveaways that they're organizing involving the book. Check out the details as soon as you can at our Instagram accounts, The Gaza Kitchen or Gaza Mom. And our last announcement for now is on Sunday at 12 noon Eastern. Laila and Maggie will both be doing an online cook-along event with the great people at the Museum of the Palestinian People. So check that out as well. There are more Gaza Kitchen events coming along, and I'll tell you about them later. But now back to our star authors. Laila, you've written very movingly about the time you spent in Gaza with the late, great food writer and travel documentarian Anthony Bourdain. Could you share a couple of your favorite memories of that trip?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's again, it's so tragic, but I will say that it was really incredible. Like everything else to do with the book and the emergence of the book and the evolution of the book happened totally serendipitously. And, I would like to think there's no coincidences in life. So maybe it was intended to happen. But, the trip, it took a while. Like most people don't realize it took more than 1.5 years for that to happen, because he was initially, and the team with no reservations when they were with the Travel Channel were denied a travel permit by the Israelis. And so it wasn't until until he moved to CNN and it became Parts Unknown, that they then tried again and were given access to Gaza. And I had to meet them there. And I feel like every time I'm meeting someone or some event around the book happens, I have like a new baby. And I just want to assure people, I just have 4 kids. People are like, how many kids do you have? Anyway, at that point it was Bayan, and she was like a few months old. And then I had my other daughter with me as well. And I had to take her with me most places because she was still nursing. I was exhausted and like jet lagged, and the whole thing was happening in 48 hours. And I felt like all this pressure to somehow represent and be able to, perfectly sum up everything to do with Gaza. Like I felt like an urgency, just like everything else related to, Maggie's always saying, you feel like you need to just say everything and everything. I'm like, yeah, because I feel like there's this urgency, like people, having worked there for years, first as a journalist, and as Maggie and those who follow know, you feel like you want to scream it out so loudly. You want people to understand what's happening. So I felt like this urgency to be able to encapsulate everything happening in Gaza in the most accurate way possible, in a way that would resonate with people. And so I was really nervous. And we met in the city in front of my house in the Gaza city. And in my mind, I was thinking, oh, he's probably going to have this like typical of American sort of mainstream presenters or chefs or whatever, this very sort of perverted view of like what's happening. And I'm sure he was shown like the best and the brightest and didn't get to see. And so I'm going to have to work really hard to like show him this other side. And like the first thing he says to me, and he has this big security detail, and they're like, wait over there, and don't bring your baby with you. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I was really nervous, and he just comes striding out, and he goes, man, he's like, hi, I'm Tony. It's nice to meet you. And he was like, man, that was some seriously bleep, bleep, bleep up stuff that's happening over there. I cannot believe what I just saw. And he just proceeds to go on and on and on about how messed up everything he just saw was, and how it was unbelievable, and how his eyes had been opened, and how he cannot believe, quote, Americans' eyes were not open to this, and they weren't seeing this. They didn't understand what was happening. It was so obvious and so plain to anybody who was there. So that when he said that, I was like, okay, he gets it. So, I don't have to do much, and so, yeah, it was just great. It was, I always talk about him being such a beautiful human being, somebody that from the first moment you meet him, you feel like you've known him for years, puts you totally at ease, makes everyone feel totally at ease, isn't presumptuous or pretentious in any sense of the word, like could sit down with, the most, we sat down with like Sultan, who we talked about, and her family, who he loved. And that was great because he couldn't get a word in. It's like every time somebody would keep interrupting, and somebody would, and he's like, is this how you guys always are? Like everybody was talking over everybody else, and we're trying to feed it. Like Sultan came as he was trying to ask me some questions, and she was literally wanted to feed him, and she was like really mad. And he's like, what's going on? Why is she upset? And I'm like, because she wants you to eat. Like, you're offending them because you're not eating the food, So he's like, oh, I'm sorry. So it was great. He just, and then we sat with the Sheikh family, who cooked fatet ajir, which I think became, aroused a lot of people's interest after that. Like, they didn't know this thing existed. And that was actually an accident. We were supposed to go, they had an agenda. And I wasn't the fixer. I was just, somebody they wanted there. That the producers had this vision of what they wanted that didn't work out. They were told by the fixer, oh, you have to go see the tunnels, and you have to do this, and none of it worked out like the way they had imagined. We sat there for an hour and a half. They weren't allowed into the tunnels. We went to the beach to go out with the fishermen. They were told it was too dangerous, and the Israeli Navy might shoot at us. And so then I was like, well, I do have this other suggestion. Do you want to go and see how we make fatet ajin? I've actually never seen it made. I would love to see it. So on the fly, we went and we sat for what ended up being like 8 hours watching the family make fatet ajin, which we didn't realize it was such a long and like laborious affair. And Bayan, or Malak at the time, was a few months old, was like, wailing bloody murder. The taxi driver, who's like, I have 4 daughters. I'm great with girls. Give her to me. After like an hour, he was like, I don't know what to do. She won't stop crying. And that's the moment where people see him take like a baby, and they don't realize like that's my daughter, and he just puts her like right to sleep, So that was one of the most beautiful moments, I think, that, and just having Abu Sultan scream and like, Anthony Bourdain being like really worried, like, why is he screaming? And, and he's like, no, this is just how we talk. Like, we're not. So, but it was an incredible experience. Yeah.
Really amazing. And I just love that piece you wrote about him. It's so sad what happened, but there we are. So on a brighter note, we have some more surprise guests.
Well, I am frankly absolutely thrilled to be able to welcome the 3rd edition of the Gaza Kitchen. I think Laila and Maggie have done such a fantastic job. And I know in this 3rd edition, the recipes are going to be delicious and the stories are going to be delightful and often very, very moving. But the most important thing about it for me is the way this represents really a heartfelt tribute to the people of Gaza and to the way they have managed to survive, to persist, to thrive, to carry on, and to pass on to future generations the legacy of their culture. It's just wonderful. Thank you so much, Laila. Thank you so much, Maggie, and blessings on you all.
Hi, my name's Yasmin Khan, and I'm the author of the travel cookbooks, The Saffron Tales, Zaytoon and Ripe Figs. I'm just jumping on here to say huge congratulations to Laila and Maggie for the 3rd edition of the Gaza Kitchen. It's such an incredible book, which for me just opened my eyes to the beauty and wonder of Gazan cuisine and I can't wait to get the new edition, and I urge you all to get yourself a copy.
So just a handful from the people who have really been moved and informed and touched to the heart by the first two editions of the book. And so it's wonderful to hear from them. So both of you, these are the tough questions coming up at the end. Gaza's 2 million people have lived under a tight siege for 14 years now and have been subjected to 4 extremely damaging assaults by the Israeli military in that time. You have both spoken about how the resilience and adaptability the Gazans have shown under these horrendous circumstances could provide lessons for the rest of the world. Can you say a bit more about that?
I have sort of 2 different kinds of responses to that. One of them is just kind of to flag the word resilience, because I think indeed, like, we can talk about a prodigious degree of resilience, and that's sort of part of what we hope to depict in the book, and it's certainly what we hope to sort of learn from the home cooks of Gaza. But also, resilience is a word that is more and more in circulation. It's on the lips of every NGO, of every organization, of everybody, and it's really draws my attention. Like, resilience seems to be the sort of, neoliberal virtue of, like, being able to put up with anything, and so while we do acknowledge and recognize one should have to be so resilient, it's notable that people start talking about resilience when they stop talking about rights. And so I feel like we have a sort of a dance to do of, like, acknowledge, recognize, admire, and learn from resilience at the same time as, like, we refuse to accept resilience as a goal or what anybody should have to be. Like, you have to fight for the rights and for a language of rights and for talking about rights, and not just like an admiration of resilience. That said, I do think that we all have, like, in this year of pandemic has taught us, the climate crisis is teaching us, like, I feel like a lot of us around the world are in a sort of sustained panic as we watch the world that we've known or that we took for granted or that we imagined that we might inherit, proving so much more fragile than we thought. And I do think there's much for all of us to learn from the people of Gaza, like so many other indigenous peoples and people that have had their choices and their life ways so ferociously curtailed by colonial experiences, how to survive, and not just survive, but to how to continue, how to keep dignity, how to maintain, little spaces of joy and little spaces of a life that's worth living, no, of a buen vivir, despite everything that's going on, and despite not, you know, being able to make choices about the context you inhabit. So part of it, for me, part of the adventure of interviewing these people is simply like, teach us how do you keep a chin up and keep a family not only surviving but in some way flourishing and sane and human and decent in these absolutely demented circumstances, because the people of Gaza have a lot of experience with demented circumstances, but those demented, like the depredations of neoliberalism are eventually bringing similarly demented circumstances even to the sort of privileged and white and first world populations. So we would all do well to learn how to listen to that, I think.
I think that's great, Maggie. And actually, I share your reservations about the whole concept of resilience. It's as if, people in horrible circumstances need to perform resilience for us white people before we can, admire them, rather than like screaming and shouting their hair out and saying world is crap, which it actually is. So yes. Laila, what do you think about?
No, it's true. I did want to say before I continue that I'm sure some of you might have heard, but Israel has resumed bombing of Gaza, like as we're talking right now. But yeah, but I mean, it's true. It's as though, and I think it's always a struggle because well-meaning people, and we talk a lot about this, often depict Gaza in a way that is unintentionally dehumanizing or strips it of its humanity by suggesting that, like, and it's hard because because like how else do you describe them? But then you often hear these caricatures of like hyper symbolism, Gaza, like full of heroes and incredible, and like you were saying, resilient and always and brave and great and always able, like no matter what, never quashed. And and meanwhile everyone is kind of in Gaza is like doing a collective eye roll, like we didn't ask for this, like we don't want this, we didn't sit here and plan out like we are going to be brave and we are going to be. It's almost like it's when you're faced with these dire circumstances. I mean, and partly on the other hand, like historically, Gaza has been a thorn in the side of like every invading army, for like Alexander the Great to, but it's, again, it's not like they sat here and said, bring it on, like we're, and so this is the thing, right? And it almost creates this like vicious cycle where they're like, oh, they can handle it, like the whole mowing the lawn, oh, they're fine, they're, oh, Gaza's like the symbol of all of, Palestine, it's like they're the place. But again, it's people there are, they're human beings, and that sort of disallows them of natural human emotion and behavior. So if they were, like you were saying, to scream or get upset, or maybe sometimes, I saw all of these really horribly sad accounts of children saying to their mothers, like during the last round of, but like, we're supposed to be brave, but I'm not brave because I'm crying or something. It's horrible. I mean, it's okay, like to cry or be upset or be, especially if you're a child. So, it's hard. It's like this nuance. Like, so how do you then depict a people or be able to narrate their story in a way that preserves that like humanity, is always like something where like, I understand like aid organizations need their donors and I always cringe when I see some of these like ads on YouTube that pop up for different relief organizations depicting Gaza with, crying children and wailing women and like demolished buildings, which, like, yes, that's part of the story, but really it's not even remotely the full. And that's kind of what we were trying to show in the book. But, again, how do you do that in a way that's like not exaggerated and not dismissing the realities? But, that's always like my struggle is sometimes people just want you to, talk about, like, if I'm invited to speak, talk about how horrible things are, right? Talk about like the most harrowing stories. And I'm like, actually, the stories that resonate the most with people aren't necessarily the ones that are, quote unquote, the most horrible, of like decapitated people and bombed out buildings. It's actually the ones where, in ordinary circumstances where families are struggling or doing mundane things, despite all of this, dementedness that Maggie was talking about. And I think people forget that. They forget that despite, the latest round of, bombings on Gaza or the 10th year of blockade, families, they're having children and they're sending their kids to school and they need to figure out what the assignments are and they need to figure out how to put food on the table. And, increasingly that food on the table is becoming less and less, resembling less and less what the traditional cuisine was like as I discover every time I go back to Gaza. So to me, those tell the more interesting story. And not to use the word story in a kind of, but they tell a more complete, I should say, story and really help us like understand Gaza in a way that isn't just, sort of a fable, right? I don't know, for lack of a better word.
I think you expressed it very, very well. We're coming up to the 1 hour mark here, and I, with everybody's permission, would like to go for a further 10 or 12 minutes because we have one more question, and I'm hoping we'll have a couple of questions from the audience. So let's just do the last question. Laila and Maggie, what hopes do both of you have for Gaza's people now? And how can those of us who live here in North America help them to realize those hopes?
I mean, I'll just start by while Maggie thinks and ponders. Maggie's always the more articulate one, so I'll leave it to her. But I just blabber away, and then sometimes I hope that something I say that there'll be a grain of like, you know, sense in it all. But anyway, really, I mean, it sounds crazy, but I feel like I've become more hopeful, not less. You know, only because again, it's if you look sort of in the past 3 decades or go back to watch clips of like Edward Said talking, you would be forgiven for thinking that there is no hope, or we've been trying to say the same message for X number of decades. But really, like, just on the whole, if we're talking just about Palestine on a whole, not even Gaza specifically, like there's been, I feel like we've huge strides in terms of just the change in the discourse and like sort of name recognition. And it sounds sort of very trivial, but it's also incredibly important in terms of like, you know, Palestine, Palestinian people, Palestinian struggle. And even just in the past year alone, I mean, in the 10 years of the book's existence, I feel like there's been also incredible strides made in terms of getting not just like the idea of Palestine, but like Palestinians and the Palestinian existence and story and struggle in all its different dimensions, right? Not just like the strictly political, is now on people's radar, people who it would have never been on their radars before, which is very encouraging to me. And I feel like that's where it starts, because the change will not almost never will come from right centers of power or just from the strictly political. It comes from all of these other peripheral areas. And just in the past year, in the past few months, like it's really been, you know, alarming in a good way, like the guy's fish shack alarming that we talk about in the book. How many like more people I've discovered that are suddenly tuned in to the travesty, you know, that is happening. And so that, to me, that's encouraging, because that's what we want. And there has been a shift in terms of describing. And in terms of Gaza specifically, I mean, it's unconscionable to me. I'm like, when will, you know, that it's still, this is maybe the part that I'm not as encouraged, that it's still acceptable to the world's like powers, or the powers that be and the regional powers, to continue to just, in whatever shape it's taking, it's, you know, tweaked a little bit here and there, so it's more acceptable and palatable to a wider audience, but that there's still this blockade on Gaza. Like, that's what I'm just like, really? Like, how is this still, how is this in any sense considered okay, you know? That to me is probably the most heartbreaking part, because I see the real effects, you know, the tangible effects it has on people every time I go. And it's heartbreaking. And it's not just, I know we talk about the food, and that is a significant part, you know, but it's not the food per se, but it's the effect it's had on people's, just the grinding effect it's had on their livelihoods, you know, and their access to those ingredients and their inability to cook with like fish. Every family I talked to when I went last time had fish once in the past 6 months. I mean, think about that for a second, you know? I mean, to me, that's the real travesty, beyond half of the population that's under 25, that can't, you know, travel, that can't, you know, communicate, not communicate, but rather, you know, physically leave, you know, exchange with the outside world. Like, how is this still allowed to happen, you know? But again, that pushes me more to being able to say, and this is why we need to continue to highlight, you know, Gaza in every way that we can.
Thank you.
I think all the Palestinian commentators about what's been happening in the last month or so are quick to point out, and I think it's very important, very relevant, is that, like, for once, all of the incredible, like the strategy has been for such a long time to make the Palestinian population, to separate the different sectors and give Palestinians living within, you know, the 48 lands, within the occupied territories, within the refugee camps in the surrounding countries, within the diaspora abroad, within Gaza, entirely different political realities, such that it's almost impossible for them to recognize each other or even like enter into a meaningful dialogue about what to do, because their circumstances that materially and politically are so different. And the big breakthrough of recent months has been this sort of concerted effort. And I think that has to a lot, I mean, I don't know, but I suspect it might have a lot to do with connectivity. I mean, here we are all having a seminar, and I'm in Spain, and Leila's in Maryland, and Helena's in DC. Like, we can start to have conversations, and we can start to build things despite physical blockade. And I think that's extremely hopeful, because until very recently, the sense was that like Gaza is this like really big problem that kind of nobody wants to deal with. And while on the one hand, Gaza is sort of the whole Palestinian situation in a microcosm, it's an illustration or a reduction of the whole Palestinian conundrum in Gaza. At the same time, like, the sense has been often that everybody's kind of leaving Gaza out because no one knows what to do about it or how to confront it. And suddenly that feels really different right now. So I would definitely say that who knows where this is going, like who knows how I suspect there are several more turns, many more turns of the screw to come that we can't anticipate, or I certainly can't. But I think it's very hopeful to see, one, as Laila said, like the discourse is changing in the States. The discourse is changing enormously. There's a generational difference that's suddenly that's suddenly connecting Indigenous struggles, Black Lives Matter, like they're relating the Palestinian things, so that it's not some isolated reality, that it's connecting itself strategically, analytically, I don't know, in every different way to other things happening in other parts of the world and closer to home in the United States. And I think there's a generation of American Jews that are no longer willing to accept that they're like necessarily bound to Zionism. And I think there are cracks showing up all over the place. So I don't know where any of this is going, but things are shifting in, I think, really meaningful ways. In terms of what I would desire for the people of Gaza, a chance to have a life above all, no, and a chance to make their own decisions and mistakes, and not under this, just the intensity of the pressure, the physical pressure, the material pressure, the psychological pressure of such a small space, so confined, so claustrophobic. It is such a claustrophobic place. And the fact that people are sane at all is, I mean, that's when we're talking about resilience. It's, can you imagine the most claustrophobic situation you can possibly conceive of, and then figuring out a way to, like, I don't know, open up a space inside your heart to like continue being human and not simply just go nuts and scream. And that's kind of where they're at. So like, I would wish them a way out of that conundrum. And how can we contribute to that? I think talking about it, obviously, you know, writing to representatives, making a political noise about it, insisting and demanding that this can't be considered acceptable or normal. And just like insistent, like I think if there are cracks appearing, it's because people are changing the language they're using and the way this conversation is going, and in the United States, and especially in the United States, but also elsewhere. And yeah, I think the best thing we can all do is just to talk about it a lot, and I'm sure we can share, you know, resources for. I know the Just World Books page has a lot of information and resources about organizations that, like, if you want to give money, give time, write to representatives, participate in BDS. There are lots of tools in our hands, but I think above all, change the way we talk about it.
Exactly. One thing that, you know, we've done, and I've done here a lot, Maggie's done as well, is, you know, hosting supper clubs, or you know, often we've had people do this as well, cook something from the book and have like a discussion, invite people who might not be as familiar. I mean, this has proven to be an extremely effective way. People like to eat, everybody has to eat, you know. and it's in a way that for people who are unfamiliar is like not threatening, and not that, but if they want to be able to engage and understand, right, so yeah. But anyway, so that works really well. I'm continuous, just in the past week, I've done all these requests for different food related events or pop-ups or something like that, related to Gaza. So.
Well, that's great. I love that you guys included in the introduction you wrote to the book this little quote from Mahmoud Darwish, where he said, "Gaza equals the history of an entire homeland. It is the brutal lesson and the shining example for enemies and friends alike." I think that's really true.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic poem for those who want to read the entire poem. It's called Silence for Gaza. It's funny talking about discourse. I'll just share this one anecdote. I was listening to the Daily on picking up my girls from school, the New York Times radio magazine, and they were interviewing the New York Times bureau chief in Beirut about what was happening. The whole episode was just trying to understand like the conundrum that is Gaza, and why. And the host kept saying, "I don't understand why they're so concerned about what was happening in Jerusalem." Like, he just kept saying this, and the bureau chief was entertaining this. Like, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Like, why are they? It's so far away from Gaza. Like, why? And I'm like, but this is unbelievable. But to your point, Maggie, about this, both actual and psychological, separation, or pushing this narrative of like Gaza is a separate thing from Jerusalem, from the West Bank, from Palestinians in 48. They're not all part of like one shared experience or one struggle. Was very evident just in that conversation. But anyway.
So now we do have a few people have said that they want to ask questions, and if anybody else does, could they put that into the chat? The first person, and I don't know who's still on the webinar, but Magda Campo, if you're there, we actually, Amel can give you video. Okay, so Magda.
Hi. Sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I don't see anyone though, but
and I want to thank you, Laila, and Maggie for writing the very first cookbook about the Gaza Kitchen. Because my husband and I, we teach at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and we started using your first edition as soon as the book appeared in our course entitled Religion, Food, and Culture of the Middle East. And you gave us the right exact way to diffuse to the students on campus. So we have about 45 students for that course every winter, that Palestinians are human beings, and through food, you can understand their conundrum and their problems. So my husband gave the lecture twice on Monday and Wednesday, and on Friday, I give the lecture in addition to demonstrating one of your dishes from that cookbook. And we have been doing this since 2013 until now. So we have ordered the third edition. And of course, we asked the students to buy, of course, the book. And my question to you is, and it made people understand more and more who Palestinians are through their food, and brought it more home to make them think that they are human beings like everybody else. So my question to both of you is, what is the third edition bringing more than what the previous two editions did not bring? I understand that it happened at the time of another invasion and less food entering through the Gaza and all that. So if you can just tell me exactly what the third edition is adding to the previous two. Thank you.
Thanks, Magda.
Well, basically, thank you so much for that reflection. That's really touching and so incredible. I would love to, see, the reaction of the students or what they've learned, or, I mean, that's just really amazing that you do that. So thank you. For the third edition, basically it was, the time was right to, it was actually way before these attacks that the idea came to update it. The printer, I guess the previous edition was about to be out of stock. And so Helena said, if you had any updates, this would be the time to do it, unless you just want to, continue to print the second edition. And so I had just been to Gaza with the World Food Program. And so we figured the time was right to be able to update, to fix a few things, to add a few new recipes, to update the references, and some of the pictures and so on. I don't know if you had anything else to add, Maggie.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunate, or I don't know how to say fortunately. And well, first of all, Magda, how amazing that you're teaching this book. It sort of takes my breath away. Like every time we hear that someone uses it for something real like that, it's really exciting and moving and amazing. And I'm so glad that the book has a chance to do that service. And I'm so grateful that people are finding it useful in that way. So that's amazing and wonderful. The book was already in, like, it was physically being printed on paper as the bombings were happening. So it doesn't include anything about this most recent moment. And we had a big debate amongst ourselves about whether we should go through and like try to update all of the information about, most of the text boxes, the book, it has text boxes about the situation of, nutrition and food distribution and water availability and that kind of stuff. And most of that is based on the interviews and the data that we collected in 2010. By now, things have changed tremendously. So with each edition of the book, to some extent, we've tried to update that information. But to some extent, we recognize that like we couldn't get back into Gaza even if we desperately tried to. And therefore, like we couldn't have those one-on-one conversations. We could gather the same information from Gisha and other information sources and NGOs and on the ground journalists. But to some extent, we decided to leave it as like a snapshot of Gaza in 2010 at the height of the. So it's kind of in between, like we add sort of a coda to each one of these saying like what's changed since 2010. In general, sadly, it's always that things have gotten much worse, like with some few exceptions, more trucks come and go than they did in 2010 now. But the water system has been just heinously damaged by these successive incursions since then. The general sort of status of nutrition, access to the viability of the economy and people's autonomy in terms of access to food, all of these things have just like nosedived since 2010. And already in 2010 it was awful. But we don't go into great detail updating those, but we do provide sort of a little coda on each one of those, talking about the changes since that moment. And then there's a little summary of Laila. Laila did go in to accompany the World Food Program in 2019. So that provided her a certain degree of a sort of an updated like sense of what's going on in Gaza and what it feels like. And a number of conversations with, she mentioned the conversation with the daughter of the former minister Abu Safiya, but also little updates that we've gotten through communications with a lot of our protagonists. So we it's updated, but only minimally so. And then we wrote a new introduction just because we had been layering on one introduction after another, and it was getting a little ridiculous. We wrote a whole new one.
So I'm going to just cut in here and invite Karima Imam, who is with us from Nigeria, to ask her question. Karima, can you turn on your microphone and your video?
I know she said, Karima is a really good friend of mine, Maggie. She used to live here in Maryland, and we were like best friends. Our kids grew up together, and then she moved back to Nigeria a few years ago. But I know she mentioned it was like midnight there, so I'm not sure if she's
Yeah,
I think I met her. Did I, Karima, did I meet you in Maryland several years ago? I think I did.
You did. I don't know.
Oh, that's so sad. I mean, we've had people on here from so many different parts of the world. I think we'd probably better at this point just invite each of you to summarize quickly what you want people to take away, and then I will do some corporate stuff, and then we have a little exit slideshow. So Laila, would you like to summarize what you want people to take away from this very short?
I mean, I said what I had to say. Basically, as I always say to people, buy it, gift it, cook with it. I always say, like, read, cook, think, repeat. That's the objective. Have fun with it. It's like I'm still continuously surprised every time I cook with it. Like, is this gonna work? Is this not? I'm always doubting myself, but I'm always really encouraged and excited every time I make something, and I'm like, wow, this is really amazing. The flavors are unique. They're different. They'll help you, retain and understand Gaza in a different way. So
lovely, thanks. And Maggie, your mic.
Yeah. Likewise, thank you all for being here with us, and I like the read, cook, think, repeat. That's a pretty good slogan to take away. And I think as we were preparing for this launch and sort of trying to think about how to frame, the relevance of this book now, when we wrote it, it was really out there. Like, it was hard to find a publisher because we were saying that, we wanted to write a cookbook about Gaza, and the cookbook publishers didn't want to touch anything about Palestine because it sounded really dangerous, and the political publishers didn't like a cookbook. I mean, really, it's sort of like frivolous lady stuff or something. So many and infinite and ongoing thanks to Helena for her accompaniment through all of these years, and her recognition of the interest of this book from the get-go. But since then, the field has changed enormously. Since then, there's been this explosion of Palestinian cookbooks, and in general, the sort of intersection between food and politics, and looking at food systems as a way of understanding sort of looking at food as a way of talking about food systems, which in turn talk about politics, economics, labor conditions, ecological issues, all of that stuff that kind of gets consolidated in food systems. That's become much more, par for the course, kind of. That's become more of a thing in a way that was maybe just beginning when we wrote this book 12 years ago. So it's really pleasing and gratifying to see that it's still relevant. It starts to feel kind of like a grandma book, like like that it's spawned this whole I don't know, I wouldn't say it's spawned it. It's somehow contributed in the mix to a whole lot of other work on this, and I think that's great. So, like, go out and do research and write books, because it's been so hugely satisfying to us, I think, to see that it's made its little contribution, it's had its little impact, and it's allowed something of a ripple effect. And the best thing I think that can happen is that this kind of studies can proliferate and make more and make different and make I don't know where I'm going with this, but thank you all very much. It's kind of amazing to us, I think, that this book continues to find a home.
Maggie, you've done amazingly well considering you're with us from Spain and you're still alive and you're awake.
2:30 in the morning, baby.
As the only bona fide grandma in the group here, I'll say I love the idea of you guys being the grandmas of a whole series of kind of Palestinian things that have happened since. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up now. Quick reminder about the Instagram live event with Laila this Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and the Museum of the Palestinian People event with a cook along on Sunday at 12 noon Eastern, also coming up soon. Our Just World merch store, so that you can buy some of your fave images from the Gaza Kitchen printed onto mugs. That's the Fugaiya mug. Yep, the Fugaiya mug. It's coming up on our merch store soon, and the Gaza Kitchen tote and various other totes, mugs, aprons, t-shirts, so that you can share your Gaza Kitchen pride. The store is not quite ready yet, so for now, we ask you just to please buy the book, recommend it to your friends, give it to your friends, buy lots of copies. And now, of course, my big thanks to my colleague Amel, who behind the scenes has done an amazing amount of work for this launch. And my heartfelt thanks to you, Laila, you, Maggie, for being with us on this whole journey for, well, I mean, I joined your journey, but still, thanks for having me along. So now, buy the book, people. Follow us on social media. I look forward to all of us staying in touch as we work together to build a more just and peaceful world. Signing off now, I'm Helena Cobban for Just World Books. Stay well.
لم يبق هنا أحد لم يسمع ضجاتهم أبواق تنفخ في السور بكاء وعويل مقطوع وصهيل خيول شاردة في شارع أجيال تهبط أجيال تصعد في كل شروق وغروب وشهود في حلقات يمضون إلى آلهة الموتى بقرابين الأحياء لم يبق هنا أحد لم يسمع ضجاتهم فاذهب واسأل هذا النائم في سفح الجبل الشاهق